Greece, rich in history and achievement from the age of antiquity to the heyday of the Byzantine Empire, and that's about it. Greece in recent centuries hasn't exactly been at the top of their game, be it under the crushing debt in the age of the European Union, the crushing instability in the Balkans during the 20th century, or its days under Ottoman rule, a period which saw Greek hierarchy, heritage, and culture face heavy pressures as Greeks endured Islamic taxes at penalty of enslavement or death, and a child tribute system where 1/5 of Greek children would be taken and raised as Muslims, either to see enlistment in the Sultan's army if they were boys, or service as a maid or servant in a harem if they were girls. Though this period was not without its own merits, as subjugated as the Greeks were in these manners, they were also awarded special privileges as shippers and businessmen across the Mediterranean with the oversight of the Ottomans, though this can't exactly be considered a high point in their society. Hello audience, Mr. Z here. Greece. Yeah, it's never really been quite the same since, well, you know. Greece's last hurrah, its period as the East Roman Empire, better known as Byzantium, an empire notable for carrying forward the spirit of the Roman Empire with an unmistakable Greek character, securing Europe from the Muslim expansion, and dominating the Mediterranean, diffusing cultures and exotic products between Europe and the Near East, helping shape the character of the region which still lingers today. The Byzantine Empire would soon develop a rivalry with a number of other regional empires and states, including the Huns, the Sasanians, Bulgaria, the Umayyad Caliphate, and of course, the Seljuk Turks, the tribe who would cripple the Byzantine grasp on Anatolia and pave the way for the rise of the Ottoman Empire, who would deal the killing blow to the Byzantines and annex Greece into their dominion, a massive realm stretching from the height of the Balkans to the southern tip of the Arabian Peninsula, from the far coasts of North Africa to the borders of Persia. But today, we'll just be focusing on Greece, the gatekeeper of Europe as it were, the first domino to fall. Indeed, Greece through its rule as the Byzantine Empire did hold off the Turks for as long as they could, but civil war and mounting internal disorder created the perfect opportunity for the Ottomans to push past what remained of their defenses, invading the Balkans, toppling the Serbian Empire, and sacking the Byzantine capital of Constantinople, hammering the final nail into the empire's coffin. Initially, the Greek aristocracy and upper classes, the intellectuals and politicians, saw eradication at the hands of the Ottomans, who feared these would be the most dangerous of the Greeks, posing the greatest threat to their rule due to their knowledge and capabilities. What remained were a great number of Greek peasantry, merchants, and a few oligarchical clerical chiefs, known as the Khoja Bashish, who, while Christian, abided by the Ottoman administration and enforced tax collection corruptly and often nepotistically on behalf of the Ottomans in exchange for special privileges. There was also a number of Greeks who had fled for the mountains, which were generally untouched by the Ottomans, and from where they'd attempt to live free of Ottoman rule, occasionally launching guerrilla campaigns against the Turks and their underlings. The 1700s would see conditions become increasingly favorable to the Turks, while the standard of living for the Greek peasants plummeted, diminishing most of the lower classes to serf status. At the same time, the educated class of the Greeks began to rise to positions never before accessible, and in great number. This would lead to the Age of Greek Enlightenment, the Greek Enlightenment period being delayed due to their existence under Ottoman rule. With the combined inspiration of the French Revolution and the proclamation by Catherine the Great that Christian revolution would lead to the liberation of the Balkans from Turkish rule, created the perfect recipe for Greek nationalism to arise. It'd only take a matter of time for the soup of total Greek revolution to cook, and with a number of minor Greek rebellions along the way, Greek independence was finally proclaimed in 1821. Something which was immediately met with Turkish retaliation, beginning with the Constantinople Massacre, a pogrom against the Greeks of the city. Massacres occurred on both sides, often against unarmed civilians, making this one of Europe's most historically brutal and savage wars. Many of the Greek factions being disorganized and occasionally combating each other, while the Turks, having been unprepared for this, also found themselves highly disorganized. Britain and France were sympathetic to the Greek effort, although suspected it was a Russian plot to annex Greece and begin expanding through the Balkans. However, as it became clear the conflict was becoming increasingly destructive, so did Russia, Britain, and France intervene on behalf of Greece, granting the Greeks the temporary calm needed to regroup and establish a unified government. A conference in London determined the limitations of the Greek borders soon before it had been liberated from the Ottomans. There was a general disappointment among the Greeks, as these limitations would exclude a number of ancestrally Greek lands, most notably Thrace, which contained Constantinople, Macedonia, Crete, and Ionia, but the Greeks weren't so ready to hassle Britain, France, and Russia for more land after they'd essentially come to Greece's rescue. The great powers were also already too hesitant to allow Greece to become a republic, instead opting for the establishment of a monarchy, with Bavarian Prince Otto, a descendant of the Byzantine empires, to ascend to the throne. Otto, having learned nothing from the past, abused his power and made himself an absolute monarch. The Greeks demanded he grant them a constitution, he said no, and they revolted until he finally did so in 1843. The Greeks very much wanted to combat the Ottomans for the rightful land, even if they weren't ready for it, and demanded an assault be launched against the Turks on a number of occasions. Otto simply couldn't, because you see, Greece wasn't so much an independent state, as it was more of an autonomous protectorate of Britain, France, and Russia, with Otto only there to make sure it didn't cause any trouble. Greece was facing immense poverty, which Otto couldn't solve. There were demands for more land which Otto couldn't meet, and there were willing calls for the military to strike the Turks while they were vulnerable, but Otto couldn't. This made him highly unpopular in the eyes of the Greeks. He's basically the Emmanuel Macron of his time. This would lead him to be deposed and replaced by British favorite Prince George of Denmark, and almost like a video game for picking Britain's favorite, Britain had given to Greece the United States, the Ionian Islands. A lame gift, in retrospect, but an essential piece of the Greek starter pack. By this point, Greece was becoming increasingly more nationalistic and began developing domestic industries, but the issue still remained that Greece lacked resources, the very same resources that laid in ancestral lands now occupied by foreign powers. One of the major players in Greek politics during this period was Theodoros Deligiannis, a populist and promoter of the Megali idea, an irredentist plan to retake ancestral lands, reinforce the ancient culture, and restore the country to Byzantine-era borders, something which was seen as the only means to truly become a free state, liberated from their debt servitude to London. Opportunities arose, most notably the opportunity to aid Russia in their war against the Ottomans in 1877, but because Greece was too poor and concerned over British intervention, the government held back. This war spelt the breakaway of the Balkan states from the Ottoman Empire, but before Russia could take Constantinople, Britain intervened. Mind you, Greece wasn't exactly in proper shape to enter the war, something which became very evident in the later Greco-Turkish War, which Greece entered on a whim and without proper preparation. Yet despite this, the drive to seize the land back did not die. Greeks stuck in Ottoman lands would also begin developing a growing sense of nationalism with their former Greek country, and a campaign would be launched to take back Macedonia through use of propaganda to spark a revolt for Greek rule. But the issue was that Macedonians were so ethnically mixed that both Greece and Bulgaria had claims to the people of the region, and the two had to compete for the allegiance of the Macedonian population. Then came the Balkan Wars. First was a war between Bulgaria, Greece, Montenegro, and Serbia against their shared enemy, Kebab. Next, Bulgaria decided it would be a good idea to take a little land from everybody, and thus our previous factions, including Kebab, and with the addition of Romania, all declared war on Bulgaria, screwing up the beautiful Russian pseudo-vassal state that was the Balkan League by making them hate each other and setting the unstable stage for World War I, but also leading Bulgaria to join Kebab and the Central Powers later down the line. Because not only did everybody hate Kebab, but now everybody hated Bulgaria, who basically also wanted their own recreated Byzantine Empire. So now we've reached World War I. King Georgios Tsoukalos is assassinated and his son Constantine the First takes the throne. He is the first Greek king to be born in Greece. He has been raised a devout Greek Orthodox Christian. He was the commander-in-chief of the Greek army during the Balkan Wars, and his very name evokes thoughts of Byzantine greatness. Here's where it gets interesting. Constantine of Greece was married to Kaiser Wilhelm's sister, Sophia of Prussia, and believed in a Central Powers victory. His prime minister, however, believed the opposite. And while Greece could not survive a naval war with Britain, had they joined the Entente instead of remaining neutral, Britain was prepared to cede Cyprus to them for land access into the Balkans. Constantine would remain neutral on account of his personal preference, something that would lead his prime minister to schism the nation, ultimately leaving him in charge while Constantine abdicated. Had Constantine seen the opportunity to battle both Bulgaria and the Ottomans for a claim to their land and taken it, things could have turned out much better for Greece at the negotiation table. Greece, with British support, would be able to fortify itself against Bulgaria and the Ottomans, combating the Bulgarians in Macedonia and leading a push into Thrace, while helping support Serbia long enough for the Entente forces to launch an upward push through the Balkans, potentially breaking Austrian defenses and knocking them out of the war early, leaving Germany alone to face off against both Russia and France. We'll assume this early cooperation from Greece allows the war to conclude closer to April of 1917, breaking the deadlocked stalemate the war had reached and saving Russia the stressors that would have helped fuel the revolutions. In this timeline following the war, Greece has ceded territory from Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire, specifically Thrace, Macedonia, and former Ionian region of Anatolia, and especially Constantinople, along with Cyprus as previously promised. And unlike in our timeline, Greece is able to hold on to that territory. Since the king and prime minister are never in disagreement, the schism never leads to the post-war political instability that allowed Mustafa Kemal Ataturk to establish a rival Turkish national government that would ultimately drive them out of Anatolia. We'd also see Russia play a role in the partitioning of the Ottoman Empire, as was intended in our timeline, but weren't able to participate in on account of domestic turmoil. This would lead Russia to support Greek claims to Constantinople, as well as Italian-occupied regions of Turkey, while also supporting Wilsonian Armenia, but pushing for it to be a Russian protectorate. In this timeline, the Turkish national movement is reduced to little more than a territorially hopeful group with little chance of expanding beyond their designated lands in the north of Anatolia. Any attempt at a Turkish war of independence would now be met with a more unified and ready Greek army, and a now more stable, unfractured Russian army stationed in Armenia. Without the Turks reclaiming Anatolia, this also means the Kurds may get a homeland carved out of French and British territories below Armenia. Turkey is relegated to the role of an essentially landlocked nation whose only port access would be to the Black Sea. Met with hostile Greeks in the west, the very likely bitter Armenians to the east, and the empires of Britain and France to its south. This being their only potential hope for a trade partnership in a neighborhood they were no longer welcome in. In a seeming role reversal, Greece was now coming out on top, with Italian-occupied lands being ceded to their growing empire in exchange for some more local lands from Austria. Russia is going to be facing some internal restructuring, as while the Bolshevik Revolution never comes to pass, conditions remain poor, and the people are still restless, leading a number of territories to secede, like the Ukraine, Finland, Poland, and the Baltic states, but the slope into revolution is far more gradual, giving Britain the time necessary to intervene and push Tsar Nicholas to establish a constitutional parliamentary monarch system where he could continue to rule as a figurehead, while the Russian people took more control of the government. However, with communistic elements already present within Russia, this could lead to a democratically elected socialist system, something that could become increasingly more popular as the Great Depression took hold, leading to not necessarily a civil war, but an ideological struggle between Russian traditionalism and a more sterile socialist future, something that could lead Russia down a path similar to Germany in our timeline. Because King Constantine is never forced to abdicate the throne and remains king, he continues pushing forward an ideal of a united Hellenic people under a new Greco-Byzantine flag. Greece was finally truly free from direct rule and from dependency. The economy began to recover as new resources flooded in, and the trade hub that was Constantinople was made full use of by King Constantine. However, despite this, a number of far-left factions did exist within Greece, and their numbers would grow with the coming depression. By this point, Constantine would pass away in his mid to late 50s, and his son would succeed him, inheriting a stronger, more unified, and less chaotic Greece than in our timeline. And just to give you an idea of how chaotic in our timeline Greece had become, within 1 decade Greece had seen 23 regime changes, a dictatorship, and 13 coups. Constantine's son, George II, would ascend the throne as the first Neo-Byzantine emperor, with Ioannis Metaxas as his prime minister. George, like his father, was staunchly anti-Turkish, having served in the war as a colonel and later a major general. In our timeline, Metaxas, seeing Greece in an ungovernable state, established a dictatorship with the support of George, but in this timeline, given the stability of Greece, the two collaborate more moderately in shaping Byzantium into a homogeneous people guided by a single goal. In doing so, suppressing the communists and promoting Hellenic nationalism, but continuing to abide by the constitution, promoting natalist policies for Greek families to receive government benefits for producing more Greek children and raising them in the Orthodox faith, while non-Orthodox inhabitants and those of foreign ancestry faced minor penalties to discourage long-term residency. This would function to restore a Greek Hellenic identity, which many felt they had lost under the centuries of Ottoman rule, especially those who were displaced and are of mixed ethnicity, giving these lost souls a land they could call home and an identity they could call their own. All the while, calls mounted for a conquest of remaining Turkish lands, and the Kingdom of Yugoslavia for Serbia's historic annexation of Greek lands, and allowing for the Turks to subjugate them, leading Byzantium to shift direction from economic development and trade to full-on militarism for what was becoming an inevitable war against the Turks. Britain would have looked upon this poorly, but there was little they could do, as the situation would not concern them greatly and would not be worth the resources expended. This would still lead to an estrangement between Greece and Britain, and thus Greece was in the market for some new allies. Allies who could appeal to their sense of territorial expansion and restoration of historic greatness. George would be a nephew of Kaiser Wilhelm, and his sympathies to Germany made him a rather popular figure to many Germans. This, paired with his strong economic and military ties to Germany, as had been seen in our timeline, could see the two develop a closer relationship in this timeline in place of Germany's relationship to Italy. 1936 would see the establishment of the Athens-Berlin axis, whilst Italy under Mussolini stokes a revolution within France, who was in the midst of a political upheaval. Promoting and supporting Philippe Pétain, the would-be leader of Vichy France, however, in launching this new French Revolution, sowed the seeds for the rise of the more dominant French Popular Front, a leftist political coalition led by socialist Léon Blum, who had the majority in the 1936 general election, spelling the beginnings of a French civil war between the right and left that may very well leave France a socialist nation in the wake of it. Russia had taken a turn for the same nationalist orthodox traditionalism that had arisen from Greece, and intended to combat the communist elements it had detected rising within its own borders. Expanding on the Russo-German Non-Aggression Pact, Russia proceeded to establish with Greece and Germany a threefold alliance, with the goals of restoring the lost lands of their empires, recognizing that there would be some contention between Germany and Russia over Polish land, but better they resolve that dispute together than need face each other in another war, especially when the French Commune, retaliating against Italy for their support of the Nationalists, proceeded to invade and annex the peninsula, forcing Mussolini to flee to Spain. Together, it was decided that the new Axis would dominate Eastern and Central Europe, creating an alliance the forces of Western Europe could not penetrate and stood no chance of overthrowing, utilizing a combination of Russian manpower, German technology, and Greece's strategic positioning to shift European dominance from the old powers of the West to the new powers of the East. The US of Z thanks you for watching. Support your legion by liking the video or join our ranks by subscribing for more. Mr. Z, out.